Dr. Ilara Vance knelt in the mud of the nesting ground, her hands pressed against the cold shells of 5 eggs. Around her, the forest was silent. The poachers were gone, driven off by the settlers who had heard the gunfire and come running. But they had done their work. The mother dragon lay 20 feet away, her great body still, her wings spread, her eyes open and empty. She had fought. She had lost. And now her eggs were dying. Ilara had spent 20 years studying the Virati. She knew their ways, their habits, their language. She knew that the eggs needed warmth, needed the heat of their mother's body to survive. Without it, they would be dead by morning. The colony's leaders stood behind her, their voices low, their arguments quick. The eggs were valuable. They could be sold to the council, traded for supplies, for protection, for recognition. The colony needed resources. The eggs could bring them. Ilara did not move. She looked at the eggs, at the cracks beginning to form in their shells, at the life still pulsing inside them. She thought about the council, about the laboratories where they would be taken, the scientists who would dissect them, the collectors who would display them. She thought about the mother, dead in the mud, her eyes still watching the nest. She stood up. "I'm taking them," she said. The colony leaders protested. They argued, pleaded, threatened. Ilara did not listen. She wrapped the eggs in her coat, carried them back to her home, and laid them by the hearth. She built a fire, fed it through the night, kept the room warm. She slept beside them, her hand on their shells, feeling the faint pulse of life inside. The colony thought she was foolish. They whispered about her in the market, called her the Dragon Woman, shook their heads at her obsession. The council sent messages, demands that she turn over the eggs, threats of sanctions, of removal. Ilara ignored them. She stayed in her home, by the fire, with the eggs. Days passed. The eggs grew warmer, their shells pulsing with light. Ilara talked to them, told them about the forest, the stars, the mother who had died to protect them. She told them they were safe. She told them they were loved. She did not know if they could hear. She talked anyway. On the 43rd night, she woke to a sound. A crack, small and sharp, like ice breaking on a frozen river. She sat up, her heart pounding. The firelight flickered on the shells. One of them was splitting. A thin line ran down its side, glowing with golden light. The crack widened. A small piece of shell fell away. Inside, something moved. Ilara held her breath. A head pushed through the opening, small and wet, its scales soft and pale. The creature's eyes were closed. Its mouth opened in a tiny, silent cry. It was blind. It was helpless. It was alive. She reached out. Her hands were shaking, scarred from years of work, old and worn. She had held many things in her life. Specimens, tools, the hands of dying friends. She had never held anything so small, so fragile. She picked the hatchling up, cradled it against her chest. Its heart beat against hers, fast and small, like a bird's. Its scales warmed against her skin. The other eggs began to crack. One by one, the shells split, the hatchlings emerged. They were tiny, all of them, no larger than her hand. Their scales were soft and pale. Their eyes were closed. They made small sounds, chirping, crying, seeking warmth. Ilara gathered them all, held them against her body, wrapped them in the blanket from her bed. They nestled against her, quieting, their breathing slowing, their scales warming. She sat by the fire, surrounded by the creatures she had saved. Her arms were full. Her chest was warm. Her heart, which had been quiet for so long, was beating fast. She looked at the hatchlings sleeping against her, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. She thought about the mother who had died in the mud, the eggs that had been cold, the colony that had called her foolish. She was a scientist. She had spent her life studying, observing, recording. She had never thought of herself as anything else. But now, holding these creatures, feeling their warmth, their trust, their need, she understood something she had not understood before. She was not just a scientist. She was something else. Something she had not known she could be. A mother. The fire crackled. The hatchlings chirped in their sleep. Ilara leaned back against the wall, closed her eyes, and let herself rest. She did not know what would come next. She did not know if the colony would accept her, if the council would leave her alone, if the dragons would survive. She did not know anything except that she would not let them go. She would keep them warm. She would feed them, protect them, teach them. She would be there. She would always be there. The night passed. The fire burned low. The hatchlings slept. And Ilara, the dragon woman, the foolish scientist, the mother, held them close and watched the light of the flames dance on their scales. She was not alone anymore. Neither were they. They had each other. That was enough. That was everything. The hatchlings grew faster than any creature Alara had ever known. Within weeks, they were the size of small dogs, their soft pale scales hardening to deep bronze. Their wings, once folded and useless, unfurled into leathery sails that caught the wind. They learned to fly in the clearing behind her home, swooping between the trees, chasing each other with shrieks of joy that echoed through the forest. They followed her everywhere. When she worked in her garden, they perched on her shoulders, their claws gentle on her skin, their wings beating the air. When she slept, they curled around her bed, their bodies warm, their breathing soft. When she walked to the colony for supplies, they circled above her, their wings blocking the sun, their shadows passing over the settlers like clouds. The colony did not know what to make of them. Dragons had never allowed humans to come so close. They had never been raised by human hands. The settlers watched with fear, with wonder, with something that might have been envy. Children followed Alara through the streets, staring at the dragons on her shoulders. Elders shook their heads, remembering the stories of dragon attacks, the wars, the deaths. Some wanted the dragons captured, sold to the council, used for the resources they could bring. Others wanted them destroyed, killed before they grew large enough to be a danger. Alara protected them with a ferocity she did not know she possessed. She stood in the market when the merchants came with offers, her arms crossed, her face hard. She stood at the colony gate when the hunters came with nets and chains, the dragons behind her, their wings spread, their eyes burning. She told them the dragons were her children, that they would not be taken, that anyone who tried would answer to her. They looked at the woman, small and fierce, and at the dragons, already half her height, and they left. She learned their language. Not the sounds they made to each other, the deep rumbles and high whistles that passed between them when they flew. She learned the sounds they made to her. A soft chirp for hunger, a low rumble for contentment, a high, thin cry for fear. She learned to read their moods, their needs, their fears. She learned that each one was different. The oldest, a female with scales like copper, was bold, curious, always the first to explore. She flew higher than the others, ventured farther into the forest, returned with strange treasures in her claws. She was fearless, except for the storms. When the thunder came, she pressed against Alara's side, her wings folded, her eyes wide, and Alara held her until the sky cleared. The smallest was a runt with a crooked wing. Her scales were pale, her flight slow, her landings clumsy. She was shy, gentle, afraid of the dark. At night, she curled against Alara's chest, her head tucked beneath Alara's chin, her heart beating against Alara's own. Alara whispered to her, told her she was safe, told her she was strong, told her she was loved. The runt did not understand the words. But she understood the voice. She understood the warmth. She understood that she was not alone. The years passed. The dragons grew to the size of horses, then larger. Their scales darkened from bronze to deep red, then to gold that shone in the sunlight. Their wings spanned the width of her home. When they flew together, the sky was full of them, 5 golden dragons circling above the forest, their shadows moving across the land like blessings. They hunted in the forests, brought back meat for Alara, laid it at her feet like offerings. They guarded the colony, drove off the predators that came down from the mountains, protected the farms from the wild beasts that roamed the plains. They had become something no one had thought possible. Dragons that trusted humans. Dragons that loved. The council sent representatives. They came in a sleek ship, their uniforms pressed, their voices smooth. They had heard the stories, they said. They wanted to study the dragons, to understand how Alara had done what the greatest minds of the galaxy could not. They offered her a position, a laboratory, funding. They offered to take the dragons, to give them a better life, to use them for the good of all. Alara stood in the doorway of her home. The dragons gathered behind her, their wings spread, their eyes burning, their golden scales bright in the afternoon light. She looked at the representatives, at their smooth words and their empty promises. She thought about the mother dragon dying in the mud, the eggs cold and abandoned, the colony that had called her foolish. She thought about the nights by the fire, the hatchlings against her chest, the years of watching them grow. They are my children, she said. They will not be taken. They will not be studied. They will not be used. Anyone who tries will answer to me. The representatives looked at her. They looked at the dragons behind her, massive and patient, their eyes fixed on the strangers, their bodies still. They saw something in the woman's face that made them step back. Something that was not fear, but something like it. Something that said she would not move. Something that said she would not break. Something that said she would burn the world before she let them touch her children. The representatives left. Their ship rose into the sky, disappeared among the stars. Ilara watched it go, the dragons pressed against her sides, their warmth seeping into her. She turned and walked back into her home. The fire was low. She fed it, watched it grow. The dragons curled around her, their bodies warm, their breathing soft. She closed her eyes and let herself rest. She was not alone. She had never been alone. She was their mother. They were her children. That was enough. That was everything. The news spread faster than light. Across the Galactic Council, across the core worlds, across the frontier colonies, the story traveled. A human woman had raised dragons. Not tamed them, not trained them, not broken them. Raised them. The dragons were not pets. They were partners. They hunted with her, protected with her, lived with her. They trusted her. They loved her. And she loved them back. Women began to come to Viridian 3. They came on cargo ships, on passenger vessels, on any transport that would take them. Some were scientists, drawn by the impossible thing Ilara had done. Some were farmers, seeking a new life on a world that was still wild. Some were refugees, fleeing the wars that burned across the core worlds, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and the hope that somewhere, there was a place where they could be safe. They came because they had heard that dragons could be loved. They came because they wanted to try. Ilara met them at the colony gate. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, her hands scarred from years of work. But her eyes were the same. Calm, patient, steady. She looked at the women who came, at the hope and fear in their faces, and she understood. She had been them once. She had been alone. She had been afraid. She had found something that changed her. Now she would help them find it too. She taught them. She took them to the nesting grounds where the wild dragons laid their eggs, showed them how to sit with the eggs, how to be still, how to be patient. She told them that dragons could not be forced. They could not be commanded. They could only be trusted. They could only be loved. Some of the women failed. The dragons rejected them, ignored them, flew away. They left the colony, went back to their old lives, their old fears. But some stayed. They sat with the eggs for weeks, for months, waiting, hoping. They slept beside the cold shells, talked to them, kept them warm. They learned what Ilara had learned. That patience was not waiting. It was being present. It was being there, day after day, even when nothing happened. Even when the eggs stayed cold. Even when hope began to fade. The eggs hatched. The women held the hatchlings against their chests, felt their small hearts beat, felt their warmth seep into their skin. They became mothers. Not in the way the galaxy understood motherhood. Not the passing of blood or the carrying of young. Something deeper. Something older. Something that had no word in any language. A bond. A choice. A love that was given freely and returned in kind. The colony grew. What had once been a small settlement of farmers and miners became something else. A sanctuary. Women came from across the galaxy, from worlds shattered by war, from colonies abandoned by the Council, from places where they had nothing and no one. They came to Viridian 3, and they found dragons. They found each other. They found a home. The dragons multiplied. The first clutch that Ilara had raised were adults now, their scales gold, their wings strong. They had found mates among the wild dragons, had laid eggs of their own. The women raised the new hatchlings, taught them, loved them. The dragons protected the colony, hunted for the colony, became part of the colony. There was no hierarchy here, no ownership. The women did not own the dragons. They were family. The settlement became a town. The town became a city. Buildings rose among the trees, built by human hands and dragon fire. Gardens spread across the valley, fed by the ash of dragon fires, watered by the rains that the dragons called. Children played in the streets, some human, some dragon, some something in between. They grew up together, learned together, became something new. Something the galaxy had not seen in 1,000 years. The Council watched from afar. They sent spies, scouts, observers. They watched the women sit with the eggs, watched the dragons hunt with the women, watched the children play with the hatchlings. They did not understand. They had spent centuries trying to control the Virati, and they had failed. They had tried force, had tried cages, had tried everything their science could devise. Nothing worked. The dragons would not be broken. But these women had done nothing. They had simply loved. They had simply stayed. They had simply been there when the eggs were cold, when the hatchlings were blind, when the dragons needed someone to trust. It was a mystery. It was a threat. The council did not understand love. They understood power. They understood control. They understood that what was happening on Viridian 3 could not be allowed to continue. They began to plan. In the chambers of the council, in the halls of power, they spoke of the dragon world, of the women who had taken what belonged to the galaxy, of the danger that was growing in the frontier. They spoke of control, of order, of the need to bring Viridian 3 back under council authority. They spoke of force, if force was needed. They spoke of fire. On Viridian 3, the women did not know. They went about their days, tending their gardens, raising their dragons, building their home. They did not know that the council was watching. They did not know that the council was afraid. They did not know that the galaxy they had left behind was planning to take what they had built. They only knew the warmth of dragon scales, the trust in golden eyes, the love that had grown from cold eggs and a fire that never went out. They only knew that they were home. They only knew that they would protect it. They only knew that they would never let it go. The Galactic Council could not tolerate what was happening on Viridian 3. In their chambers, on their worlds, in the halls where power was measured and traded, they spoke of the dragon world with fear and with fury. Dragons were valuable. Their scales, their blood, their eggs, all worth fortunes on the black market. The council had spent centuries trying to control them, to capture them, to break them. They had failed. Now a handful of women had done what the combined might of the galaxy could not. It was an embarrassment. It was a danger. If others learned that dragons could be raised, that they could be trusted, the council's control over the trade would crumble. The markets would collapse. The power would shift. The council would fall. They sent a fleet. 20 warships, bristling with weapons, filled with soldiers. They traveled for weeks, crossing the galaxy, burning fuel that could have fed 100 worlds. They came to Viridian 3 not to negotiate, not to ask, but to take. The commander was a tall, hard-faced being from a species that had never known defeat. He had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, brought systems to their knees. He looked at the small colony below, at the women in their fields, at the dragons circling the sky, and he smiled. This would be easy. The ships descended through the atmosphere, their hulls dark against the blue sky. They landed in the fields outside the colony, their engines tearing the earth, their weapons pointing at the homes below. Soldiers poured out, their armor gleaming, their rifles ready. The commander walked at their head, his boots crushing the flowers that grew beside the path. He had his orders. He would give the women one chance. Then he would take what he came for. The women gathered in the central square. They came from their homes, from their gardens, from the nesting grounds where their dragons laid their eggs. They were farmers, scientists, refugees. They had no weapons. They had no armor. They had nothing but the clothes on their backs and the dragons that flew above them. Ilara stood at the front. She was old now, her hair white, her hands scarred from years of work. The dragons circled above her, their wings blocking the sun, their shadows falling across the square. The commander stopped before her. He looked at the woman, small and old, and he laughed. "You are Ilara Vance," he said. "The dragon woman." He did not wait for her to answer. "The council demands that you surrender the dragons. All of them. You will hand over your knowledge, your methods, your records. You will submit to council authority. You will do this, or you will be destroyed." Ilara looked at the ships behind him. She looked at the weapons, at the soldiers, at the power that had come to take what she had built. She looked at the women beside her, at the children watching from the windows, at the dragons circling above. She had spent her life studying, learning, loving. She had raised dragons when the world said it was impossible. She had built a home when the galaxy said she had no right. She was old. She was tired. But she was not afraid. She looked at the commander. "No," she said. The commander's smile faded. He had not expected this. He had expected fear, submission, the ease of victory he had been promised. He looked at the woman, at her calm eyes, at her steady hands, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he did not understand. He pushed it aside. "Fire," he said. The ships powered their weapons. The soldiers raised their rifles. The women did not move. The dragons did not flee. The sky grew dark. Not with ships. With dragons. They came from the mountains, from the forests, from the wild places where the council thought they had driven them to extinction. They came in thousands, their wings blocking the stars, their scales shining in the fading light. They came because the women had called them. They came because the dragons of Viridian 3 had told them that their mothers were in danger. They came because family comes when it is needed. The council's fleet was surrounded. The dragons circled the ships, their wings beating slow, their eyes burning in the darkness. They did not attack. They did not need to. They simply were there, thousands of them, filling the sky, blocking the stars, waiting. Their voices rose in a song that had not been heard in generations, a song of fire and ice, of mothers and children, of a bond that could not be broken. The commander looked at his senses. He looked at the thousands of dragons surrounding his fleet. He looked at the woman standing before him, old and small, her hands scarred, her eyes calm. He understood. He could not win. He had never been able to win. The dragons were not beasts to be captured. They were not resources to be exploited. They were children. They were family. They were loved. He lowered his weapon. "Retreat," he said. The fleet rose into the sky. The soldiers climbed back into their ships. The warships powered their engines and left. They did not look back. They did not return. The council, for all its power, for all its weapons, for all its centuries of trying, could not take what it could not understand. It could not break what love had built. The dragons descended. They landed in the square, among the women, among the children. They pressed their heads against the women's hands, folded their wings, settled into the warmth of home. Ilara stood among them, her dragons around her, her children beside her. She looked at the sky where the fleet had been, at the stars coming out one by one. She smiled. They were safe. They were home. They would always be home. The council would not return. The galaxy would learn. And the mothers of dragons would keep what they had built. Not with weapons. Not with walls. With love. With trust. With a bond that could not be broken. With a family that would never be taken. Years passed. Ilara grew too old to work, too old to walk far from her home. Her hands, once strong enough to lift a dragon hatchling, now trembled when she reached for her cup. Her legs, once steady on the forest paths, now carried her only from her bed to the chair by the hearth. But she was not alone. The dragons she had raised were with her. Their scales were gold now, their wings strong, their eyes wise with age. They brought her food, brought her water, brought her warm furs to wrap around her thin shoulders. They curled around her at night, their bodies warm against her old bones, their breathing soft, their hearts beating in rhythm with her own. The other women came to visit. They brought their children and their grandchildren, their dragons and their dragons' hatchlings. The colony that had begun as a small settlement had grown into a city. Buildings of stone and wood rose among the trees, built by human hands and dragon fire. Gardens spread across the valley, fed by the ash of dragon fires, watered by the rains that the dragons called. The council left them alone. They had learned. They would not come back. On Ilara's last night, the dragons gathered around her home. They came from the mountains, from the forests, from the wild places where the wild dragons still nested. They came from the city, from the farms, from the nesting grounds where the women sat with their eggs. They came because they knew. They always knew. The women came too, old and young, mothers and daughters, those who had been there from the beginning and those who had just arrived. They stood behind the dragons, silent, watching. Ilara lay in her bed. Her hand rested on the snout of the runt, the one with the crooked wing, who was old now too, her scales faded to pale gold, her eyes soft with age. The runt had never left her. Not for a day. Not for an hour. She had been there when Ilara built the fire, when she sat with the cold eggs, when the hatchlings emerged blind and helpless. She had been there through the years of growing, through the years of learning, through the years of building. She was the smallest. She was the shyest. She was the one who had been afraid of the dark. Ilara had held her against her chest every night, whispered to her, told her she was safe. Now the runt held her, her great head resting on Ilara's chest, her breath warm on Ilara's face. Ilara looked at the women gathered outside her window. She saw the faces she had taught, the hands she had guided, the hearts she had opened. She saw the scientists who had come seeking knowledge and found something more. The farmers who had come seeking land and found a home. The refugees who had come with nothing and found a family. She saw the children they had raised, the dragons they had loved, the world they had built together. She smiled. The dragons began to sing. It was a song that had not been sung for 1,000 years, a song that the old dragons remembered from before the wars, from before the hunters, from before the galaxy forgot what dragons were. It was a song of mothers and children, of warmth and safety, of bonds that could not be broken. It rose from the throats of the dragons, from the young and the old, from the wild and the raised, from the thousands who had gathered in the valley. It filled the night, echoed off the mountains, carried across the stars. The women listened. They did not understand the words. They did not need to. They understood the song. They understood what it meant to sit with cold eggs, to wait through the dark nights, to hold a tiny, blind creature against your chest and feel its heart beat against your own. They understood what it meant to be a mother. Not of blood, not of birth, of choice, of love, of a bond that could not be broken. Ilara closed her eyes. Her breath slowed. The runt pressed closer, her head against Ilara's chest, her warmth seeping into Ilara's old bones. The other dragons pressed close too, their bodies surrounding the small home, their wings folded, their voices raised. Ilara felt their hearts beating, their breath on her skin, their love. She was not afraid. She had done what she was meant to do. She had loved. She had raised. She had built a family that would last beyond her. She had shown the galaxy that dragons were not beasts to be feared, not treasures to be taken, not weapons to be used. They were children. They were family. They were love. Her breath stopped. Her hand slipped from the runt's snout. The runt let out a cry, a thin, high sound that cut through the song. The song paused, then rose again, stronger, deeper, a song of loss and of life, of endings and of beginnings. The women wept. The dragons sang. And Ilara, the dragon woman, the foolish scientist, the mother, lay at peace in the home she had built, in the arms of the children she had raised. In the years that followed, the story of the mothers of dragons spread across the galaxy. Women came from every world, seeking the sanctuary, seeking the dragons, seeking a place where they could be what they were meant to be. The dragons came too, from the wild places, from the mountains, from the forests, drawn by the song that never stopped, the song that called them home. The colony became a world. The world became a symbol. A place where the old rules did not apply. A place where strength was not measured in weapons. A place where a woman could sit with an egg for 4 to 3 nights and watch it hatch, could hold a tiny, blind creature against her chest and feel its heart beat, could raise the unraiseable and know that she had done something that mattered. The mothers of dragons. The women who loved when the galaxy told them to fear. Who built when the galaxy told them to destroy. Who raised when the galaxy told them it was impossible. They were not warriors. They were not heroes. They were mothers. And they had changed everything. Not with weapons. Not with armies. With patience. With warmth. With a love that would not break. A love that would not end. A love that would last beyond them, in the eggs that would hatch, in the children who would grow, in the world that would never forget. The fire never went out. The song never stopped. The mothers of dragons would always be.